Section 12 of Through Fairy Halls of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Peter Oxenhandler. Through Fairy Halls of My Book House, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The Marvelous Pot by J. Christian Bay. Out where the land was poor there stood a small cottage. The roof was so low that one could hardly see it from the road. In this cottage lived a man and his wife. They were so poor that they couldn't afford to keep more than one cow, and yet they were honest and worthy. Times became worse and worse. They sold their furniture and lived on the bare floor. An ugly old man in town bought their poor little things, but refused to pay for them. That was how he treated poor people. He cheated them, too, by putting sawdust in the flour that he sold them, and he took their very last cent for sugar, so mixed with salt that it would not sweeten anything. The poor people didn't know what to do, for their children had to go hungry. At last they made up their minds to sell the cow, and the man started for town, leading Bossy by a rope. As he walked along the road, a stranger hailed him and asked if he wanted to sell the cow. "I'll take $20 for her," answered the man. "All my money is gone," said the stranger, "but look here, I have a little thing which is worth more than $20. Here is a pot. I'll give you that for your cow." And he pulled forth an old iron pot with 3 legs and a handle. "A pot?" said the poor man. "What good would that pot do me and my family when we have nothing to put in it? Do you think one gets anything out of a pot without putting something into it?" Just then the 3-legged pot began to talk. Take me, it said. "I'll get food enough for you and all your family." When the poor man heard this, he thought that if the pot could speak, it might do even more. So he closed the bargain, took the pot, and brought it home. When he returned to the cottage, he first went to the stall where the good old cow had stood, for he was sorry that he had lost her. He then tied the pot where the cow had been, and went into the house. "Did you sell the cow?" asked his wife. "Yes," said he. "That is well," remarked the wife. "The money you got will last a long time, if we can get some honest flour and sugar of the rich merchant." Then the man had to confess that he had received no money for the cow. "Dear me," said the woman. "What did you get then?" He told her to go and look in the stall. When the wife saw the iron pot, she scolded her husband roundly. "What a blockhead!" she cried. "Why didn't I take the cow to town myself? I never heard of such foolishness, to sell a cow for an old iron pot." "Clean me and put me on the fire," cried the pot all at once. The woman was dumb for wonder. Can you speak? Are you alive?" she asked at last. "Come and see," said the pot. So the woman took the pot, scrubbed and cleaned it, and put it on the fire. I skip, cried the pot. "How far do you skip?" asked the woman. "To the rich man's house, to the rich man's house," cried the pot. "Here I go, lackety, 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 lackety," and off it went, on its 3 small legs, up the road. The rich merchant lived in the middle of the town, in a great house. His wife was in the kitchen, baking bread, when the pot came pattering in, jumped on the table, and stood there, stock still. "Well," exclaimed the rich man's wife, "I call that luck. I just needed you for the pudding I am going to bake." So she put all kinds of good things into the pot: the flour, sweet sugar, a lot of butter, raisins, almonds, and a good pinch of spices for flavoring. At last, when the pot was full of rich and savory dough, she tried to take it by the handle to put it into the oven, but lackady, 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 lackady went the three short legs, and the pot was soon out of the door. "Dear me!" screamed the woman. "Where are you going with my fine pudding?" "To the poor man's home, to the poor man's home," said the pot, and off it went in earnest. When the poor people saw the pot as it skipped into their room with the pudding, they were very glad. The man asked his wife if she didn't think the bargain turned out pretty well after all. She said she was pleased indeed, and begged pardon for the hard words she had used. They made a fine meal of the pudding, and the children had all they could eat. Next morning the pot cried again, "I skip, I skip." "How far do you skip?" asked they. "To the rich man's barn, to the rich man's barn," it shouted, and off it went. When it came to the rich man's barn, it stopped at the gate. There were some men inside threshing wheat. "Look at that black pot," they said. "Let us see how much it will hold." And so they poured a bushel of wheat into it. The pot held it all, and there was still space left. Another bushel went in, but even this did not fill the pot. So they threw in every grain of wheat they had. When there was no more room left, the legs began to move, and lackady, 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 the pot was off up the road. "Stop!" cried the men. Where do you go with all our wheat?" "To the poor man's home, to the poor man's home," cried the pot, and off it went on its way. Next morning the pot once more skipped up the road. The sun was out, the birds bathed in the brook, and the air was so warm that the rich merchant had spread his money on a table near an open window to prevent the gold from becoming tarnished. All at once the pot stood on the window-sill, and as the man counted his money, it made a skip and a bound and stood right beside him. He could not imagine where the pot came from, but thought it would be a good place to put his money as he counted it. So he threw in one handful after another until all was there. At that the pot made another skip and a bound and landed on the window-sill. "Hold on!" shouted the rich merchant. "Where are you going with my money?" "To the poor man's home, to the poor man's home," answered the pot as it jumped from the window, and it skipped down the road so merrily that the money danced within it. In the middle of the poor man's home it stopped and turned a somersault. The money rolled all over the floor, and the poor people could scarcely believe their eyes. Then the little pot cried, "As much for you as is your due, and the rest for the other poor people in town from whom the rich man stole it." "Many thanks, little pot," said the man and his wife. "We'll keep you well cleaned and scoured for this." Next morning the pot again said it was ready to skip. "How far do you skip?" asked the farmer's family. "To the rich man's house, to the rich man's house," and off it was. It never stopped until it stood right in the middle of the rich man's office. As soon as he saw it, he cried, "There is the black pot that carried off our pudding, our wheat, and all of our money. Here, you! Give back all the things you took from me." "You took it from the poor people all over town," answered the pot. "Now it goes back to whom it belongs. Make your money honestly, and you'll keep it. Goodbye." The three short legs began to move. "Hold on!" yelled the merchant, and he flung himself squarely on the pot to hold it. But the pot kept on moving. I skip, cried the pot. "Skip to the North Pole if you wish," shrieked the merchant. At that the pot skipped down the road, and the man now found himself stuck to it fast and carried along by force. He tried hard, but could not free himself. He saw the doors of his neighbors' houses rushing past and yelled for help, but nobody heard him. The pot ran faster and faster. It passed the poor people's little cottage, but never stopped. And nobody ever saw hide or hair of the rich merchant, who mixed his flour with sawdust and put salt in the sugar, until some wise men one day climbed way up to the top of the earth and discovered the North Pole. There sat the rich man rubbing his nose with both hands, for it was purple with cold. End of section 12. Recording by Peter Oxenhandler. Google Sites, Oxenhandler voice.